Welcome back, Generals. My name is Doug with 2 Plus Tough, and we are going day by day dissecting the new rules coming out for factions in the 2026 Generals Handbook. They've gone a different route this year, where instead of having just one thing of rules that every faction has access to, instead they're giving everyone a little minor battle tome update to try and add a little bit of spice, flair, or variety into your army building lists. If you like this kind of content, please let me know in the comments down below, because today we are talking all about the Flesh Eater Courts. And I cannot think of a more perfect faction to be a participant in the Scourge of Ghyran than one of the big bads that existed in the previous crusade or campaign we did. The Dawnbringer series is where we got the Ushran release and stuff like that. That'll happen in Ghyran. And so I look forward to him being a pivotal story point, hopefully, going forward. But today we are talking about the actual rules that we get. And if you haven't noticed, this is going to be much more of an audio medium. I was kindly sent these rules in advance by Games Workshop. However, they asked that I not do a screen share. So I put together a slideshow that's just going to help me keep my thoughts coordinated while I read this stuff off to you and have discussions in between, kind of giving my thoughts on each of these. If you have more to add or disagree, or just a different perspective on a particular rule, please leave it in the comments down below. I always pin the most helpful ones, and at no point do I claim to be an authority on the gameplay of Age of Sigmar. But if you're someone who doesn't have time to read the articles, or a job that prevents you from doing it like driving, this is for you. So who are the mighty Flesh Eater Courts? Well, these are the deluded and deranged cannibals that seem to scatter every corner of the mortal realms. When war and desperation and famine all converge to create a series of very hungry refugees or survivors, and a passing arborant ghoul king might hear their pleas, come in and give them a little bit of, we'll say, succor. By that I mean he warps them into his delusion, and instead of being starving, emaciated, and neglected people, now they see themselves as regal knights and nobility. They enter into an infectious delusional state that every single one of them has. And so one of the things that also makes them unique is that not all of these guys are undead. Your basic ghouls are just dudes. The bigger stuff that you get when it comes to like the cryptors and stuff like that are just regular people that are slowly being infused with vampire blood to make them like morph and whatever. But again, they see themselves as peasants, knights, royalty, and there's always this great dichotomy of the horror that you are actually seeing on the table and what they perceive is happening, which makes them very fun and engaging characters to read about. Ushran in particular is very fun to read. His segments in the Dawnbringer section were some of my favorites, because he knows enough to know that he's insane, but not enough to know like or even formulate a plan on how to get better or anything, or if that's even the goal. But it's like if the Mad Hatter every once in a while did the Ben Affleck smoking a cigarette meme pose, where it's those two personalities just flicker sometimes, and it's a lot of fun to read. Now on the tabletop, the Flesh Eater Courts are a horde infantry army. They do not have a ton of like war machines and stuff like that. The closest they can do from a different kind of list from the infantry hordes are cavalry and monsters, the zombie dragons, terror geist, those kinds of things. There is a way to build a list that really features them, but it becomes difficult because historically, at least throughout 4th edition, Ushran has been the biggest synergy piece for this faction. Essentially, every hero in your army, big or small, wants to get into combat and do damage because it helps them accrue what are called noble deed points. And when you have 6 of those, they buff kind of a bubble around your hero, which is wonderful on paper, but in practicality, Ushran is one of the few heroes of the faction who can walk up, punch something, collect his noble deed points, and then even have a shot at surviving a counter punch so that they can, next turn, share those buffs, right? Everybody gets a chance to do their thing. So it's been a faction defined by the fact that you kind of need the big head honcho to even play at a level like the other factions can. I'm not even talking about power gaming or events and stuff like that. I personally had a Flesh Eater Courts army. I tried doing a whole host of different combinations, leaving Ushran out, because I typically don't play with named characters, and I just couldn't get it to work. So I am hoping between a few balance updates, the little bit of rules updates we've gotten before, and this, I hope to see Flesh Eater Court lists that are out there without the king himself, because it means you can probably have like a bunch more units or another big dragon. Make your list however you'd like. So what do we get here? Well, in this little expansion here for Scourge of Ghyran, we get battle formations and monstrous traits, as well as 2 new Warscrolls. So let's start going through them together. The first of the battle formations is called Impassioned Serfs. I think I accidentally wrote Overwhelming Hordes in my slideshow. That's the name of the ability, but the battle formation itself is Impassioned Serfs. But here it is. Pick a friendly Serfs unit that did not charge this turn and is in combat to use this ability. Then pick an enemy unit in combat with that Serfs unit to be the target. Effect: the target cannot make pile-in moves for the rest of the turn. Okay, so you take one of your Horde units, barrel down on someone, and you effectively are allowed to shut off their ability to do pile-ins. Now, I had an ability somewhat like this when I went and took my Flesh Eater Courts, actually, to Holy Havoc, and I did find it to be much more, I guess, jarring than I read it on paper. Because on paper, I'm like, oh, okay, I don't have to move my models tediously to be able to get everyone into attacks. Even better. And then when it came down to it, I'm like, oh man, that's like a significant number of attacks depending on the unit that you're doing it to, and their ability to like shimmy around for objectives and stuff like that. So it has more play, it's just not the sexiest. And the second of the battle formations is Questing Courtiers, and their ability, again, I'm sorry I miswrote it here, is the Blessings of the Chalice, which the effect here, friendly Flesh Eater Court heroes have a ward of a 5-up if they have destroyed a unit this battle, which does not appeal to me whatsoever, because the point is they are struggling to kill things. Then again, a 5-up ward is never a thing to turn your nose at, but it just doesn't seem like it's going to come up a whole lot. Where things really start to cook for us, however, is the monstrous traits. Remember, Flesh Eater Courts, they got zombie dragons, they got terrorgeists, they got all kinds of people riding on those things. Our first one here is Revered Monstrosity. Add 1 to the hit rolls for combat attacks made with companion weapons by other friendly, non-unique Flesh Eater Court monsters while they're wholly within 12 inches of this unit. I like this because there are already buffs on the Ghoul King on Zombie Dragon that he already acts as sort of like a force multiplier for other monsters as well, so stacking this on top of him just does what he wants to do better, which is fantastic. So +1 to hit rolls for something as nasty as a Terrorgeist is pretty stinking cool. The second one here is Savage Abomination. Add 1 to the attacks characteristic of this unit's companion melee weapons. Simple and sexy, and I tell people all the time, the rules that you remember, even if it's mediocre, is 100% better than the amazing rule that you forget. A flat +1 attack is good. And the third one here is Horribly Resilient. This happens at the end of any turn. Heal D3 to this unit, and if it's not a hero, you heal 2d3 instead. So if you're taking, an unmanned or unridden upon mount of a Terrorgeist or Zombie Dragon, a little bit more healing, which is cool. Now, moving forward, we do, like I said, get 2 new Warscrolls here, and they, to me, are doozies, and I enjoy them quite a bit. The first one is the Aberrant Ghoul King. This, if you don't know, is the basic hero that if you don't build him riding the Zombie Dragon or Terrorgeist, there's a little base in there you can put him on foot. This is that. And for the longest time, he was essentially just like a solo melee missile is kind of how I envisioned him. You can load him up with an artifact that makes him super killy, but really his job is to run up and smash something as hard as possible. He used to have a bunch of buffs on the charge, and then he can kind of fade back or do whatever he needs to do. Now, he's much more taken the role of almost like a chaos warlord within the faction. He is a hero who is able to bring a whole flock of courtiers within his battle group, letting them functionally act as a single unit. And instead of being a murder solo, now he's a buff piece for minor heroes. So his profile is a 6-inch move, a 5-up save with a 6 ward. That's all pretty standard for Flesh Eater Court heroes. 2 control and 5 health. Again, minor hero. He comes at the enemy with his blood-stained talons and fangs. Anti-hero, +1 rend. But the standard profile is 5 attacks, 3s to hit, 3s to wound, 1 rend, and 2 damage. Again, very standard for the stuff we see in Flesh Eater Courts. That's the weapon profile of just about all the heroes. But he has 2 passive abilities that are pretty sick. The first one is called the King's Court. Add 1 to the attack's characteristic of melee weapons used by other friendly, non-monster Flesh Eater Court heroes while they are wholly within 12 inches of this unit. In addition, add 1 to the attack's characteristic of this unit's melee weapons for each other friendly, non-monster Flesh Eater Court hero wholly within 12 inches to a maximum of 3. So plus 3 meaning. So he hands out +1 attack to the melee weapons of all his courtiers, and they also add +1 to his attack up to 3. And while I'm still not enthused by that courtier battle formation, like they get a 5-up ward when they kill something, it does make a lot more sense in the context of this dude's going to be like, this is when the squad basically rolls out and tries to kill everything. And his second ability here is also passive. It's called Long Live the King. If this unit would be destroyed before removing it from play, friendly, non-unique Flesh Eater Courts units wholly within 12 inches of this unit become enraged until the start of your next turn. Melee weapons used by friendly enraged units have crit auto wound and score critical hits on an unmodified hit roll of 5-up. Now, if I'm not mistaken, some of the bigger units in the Flesh Eater Courts already have crit auto wound, but this, for those, the additional benefit is now it goes off on a 5-up. And a lot of the heroes don't have crit auto wound necessarily, so this would then pass it on to them provided you're running him in the King's Court. Now, his new points cost, he's still only 120. The dude's cheap as chips. And in his regiment options, any Flesh Eater Court noble, any Flesh Eater Courts. That's it. He just has a whole wide open gate. Let him take whatever he wants, but he buffs the courtiers specifically, and you can try to use those as sort of the anchor point of your army. So I find him to be an interesting change. I mean, certainly much more interesting than his last iteration. How about that? I think we can all agree on that. But the second one is the Gore Warden. This is the Aberrant Gore Warden. This is, I believe, one of the models you get in their starter set. I know it was part of the wave of releases that came out to supplement them when the Dawnbringers book set came out. But essentially, he's an Aberrant Ghoul King with wings, and he's more meant to buff the cavalry side of things than the infantry side. So our boy here, Gore Warden, has a 12-inch move because he can fly, 5-up save, 6-up ward, 2 control, and 7 health, so he's a little bit more chonky than the Ghoul King. His weapons, very familiar profile, 5 attacks, 3s to hit, 3s to wound, 1 rend, and 2 damage. His first ability is passive, and it's called Glorious Charge. Effect: while this unit is within combat range of a friendly Knights unit and has charged this turn, this unit has a ward of 5-up. And its gory talons and fangs have charge +1 damage. Why they just didn't put charge +1 damage in the weapon profile, I do not know. Oh, because they want it to be conditional that he has to be near knights. I understand now. Okay. Oddly conditional, but he does travel really well with the Morbeg Knights, who love to zip around the table. And his second ability is, I think, really where he shines. Once per turn, army-wide, at the end of an enemy turn. Swooping Descent. Effect: to remove this unit from the battlefield and then set it up again more than 9 inches from all enemy units and either wholly within 6 inches of the board edge or within 3 inches of an objective that you do not control. So functionally, this means just by having this piece on the board, your opponent is always going to want to keep a unit near an objective, pinning them down in place so that hopefully your hordes can then overrun them. And that to me is the real ability. Like the Stormcast have a banner that lets you steal an objective if there's nobody on it within 18 inches. This turns him into that banner. And what's great is he has stuff to do and forces to buff along the way, but the minute your opponent lets up on an objective, that's when you snap your fingers and you got him. Not like in a negative gotcha kind of moment, but like this is what this dude exists for. Right there at the end of the turn, snapping up objectives. Oh, it's beautiful. His points cost is going to be 140, which sounds about in line with what he was before. Pretty close anyway. He can take 0 to 1 Flesh Eater Court Nobles, 0 to 1 Serfs, and any Knights available. So Knights, your big ones are going to be Morbeg Knights and Crypt Horrors, but I just don't think Crypt Horrors are doing the same thing he is, but I could be wrong about that. Please let me know if you disagree. I just think the Morbeg Knights are going to have the speed to want to move around with him. So what can we take away from this particular update here for our Flesh Eater Court boys. I say monster lovers rejoice. This set of monstrous traits, I love them all. The Revered Monstrosity, adding a kind of a force multiplier element to one of your monsters, adding one to their attacks, and a healing mechanic are both great options. If you're someone who likes the dragon lifestyle or the Terrorgeist lifestyle, this is really for you, which I think is important because I think it's going to pull some of that necessity for Usharan away. Every time they add something to something else, it helps. I adore the thematic idea of the Ghoul King leading a squad. Like, I wouldn't do it for every game. It probably wouldn't be a normal list that I have. But I do think there is opportunity for a very thematic list of heroes going out there to do a thing. I did something very similar when I played my Bone Splitters back in the day, but the key to them, right, what made that work was that all of their little heroes had one of the, like, if I fight, then I get to pick a Bone Splitter unit near me, and they get to fight. But back then, it didn't have the caveat of like an infantry unit. So you could just get a bunch of heroes and then chain all the heroes off each other, and then the last hero makes a unit go. This doesn't quite have the same utility of making them functionally all attack at the same time and act as one unit. However, I will say it's pretty interesting. If you're trying to create a faction where you get a bunch of tiny heroes on the table, manufacturing ways to make that happen and make it conducive to gameplay, I think, is important. And I appreciate them taking a crack at it. Whether or not it'll change things, I don't know, but I think it's really cool. Personally, I would have instead of the King's Court, like, he gives all of his courtiers +1 attack. I would have loved it if for every one of them that's alive, he gets +1 noble deed point. That means every 2 turns, just by being around his bros, he's getting topped off to be able to do the faction ability. That's my call, but I'm also someone who also thinks that, like, Usharan imbalances the internal balance of the army, so that's kind of my hot fix. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, though. I do think that they have a new level of objective play, absolutely, between the hordes of serfs that are going to be pinning you down with a lack of pile-in moves, to the Gore Warden is just an objective piece in my mind because he forces your opponent to be on their toes, to hold something back when they probably don't want to. Now, its effectiveness is going to matter faction to faction. If they have long-range shooting, that's a perfect opportunity to just put them on a back objective. But for factions that don't, this is going to introduce a real push and pull, and I appreciate that it's there. My question for you folks, if you are a current Flesh Eater Court player and you've been really trying to make this army work on a competitive level, do you feel that Usharan is still a necessary addition to your force? Meaning, do the monstrous traits and the ability of the Ghoul King to create a squad of big fighters meaningfully change the internal balance of the book? This is probably one of the more hand-wavy of the Scourge of Ghyran updates that I have. And even then, I do like a few standouts. I do like the overwhelming hordes, the monstrous traits. I adore the Gore Warden's War Scroll. But I'm curious on your thoughts. Do you think it addresses the underlying issues with the faction? Is Usharan still the man? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this video with me. And please tune in next time. We're going to be talking about another faction tomorrow. And I really hope that you'll join me for that because I'm excited. If there's any models you're going to be picking up as preparation for the Scourge of Ghyran, please consider using my affiliate link in the description down below. You'll save money on every purchase, and it throws a tip in my tip jar. Thank you so much for everyone who's watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.